real port of this area was Acre to the north, for a very simple reason, simple topography. Anybody looking at a map of Israel can see this. The coastline is perfectly smooth, and that's caused historically by Nile silt from down there being swept up along the Mediterranean current goes in this direction.
From Egypt.
From Egypt. And the coastline, basically, if you look at a map, looks sort of something like this, because that's what it is. At Haifa, on the Carmel, the mountains jut out into the water, and that causes a bay area between Haifa and Akko that's not filled with silt. The beaches from Akko north basically are rocky beaches. So essentially, the first natural harbor of any size is up there. And he's got a problem. His capital is down here in Jerusalem. He's part of the Roman.
Herod the Great.
Herod the Great.
Yeah, the great builder, obviously.
The Great.
Western Wall,
exactly.
Masada, yeah.
Right, so he built a city up here in Samaria called Sebastia. And this is the port that's going to connect Rome, the empire, with his major city and with Jerusalem. And he, tremendous vision, builds a port over there by creating an artificial harbor, sinking frames with cement. I mean, it's a project by today's standards, right, 2,000 years ago. Huge breakwater lighthouse. We can see the remnants of the lighthouse, the base of that building over there. And in its day, the largest port in the Roman Empire.
Wow. Right here?
Right here. Right.
Caesarea. Wow.
We have in the book of Acts chapter 25, at the end of 25, getting into 26, 27, amazing account of the Apostle Paul standing his ground, squaring his shoulders, man, and going hard for the gospel. And here's what the Bible says, that Paul was in Jerusalem and was with a lot of the Sadducees, Pharisees. They didn't like his teaching. They didn't like where he was coming from because he was talking about Jesus. And they weren't liking how he was connecting the scriptures. And so they brought charges against him, wanted to see him actually put to death. And so they contacted the governor in the area here, Felix, and Felix brings him in and questions, see what's going on. And then Felix gets transferred out. Another guy named Festus comes in. Festus, he reminds me of the guy from Gunsmoke. But Festus comes in, new governor, and he's seeing everything go on. And he goes, look, let's just go back to Jerusalem and get it worked out there. And he said, no, I'm not going to Jerusalem because I know they'll kill me if I go there. And so the Bible says, he said, I appealed to Caesar. The reason he could do that,
citizen, right?
He was a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
And if you appealed to Caesar, then you had safe, guaranteed passage that you could get to Caesar as a Roman citizen. He knew what he was doing because he knew Jerusalem wasn't a place to be.
Right.
So now here he is, and this area right here is where now he's not really on trial as much as Festus is trying to find out what charges can we tell Caesar that have been applied to him.
Now the Bible says that Paul sailed from this great port city to his hometown of Tarsus. It also says that he spent time here during his second and third missionary journeys. But most famously, the Apostle Paul stood trial right here in Caesarea, not far from where I'm standing right now, in front of Herod Agrippa, where Paul boldly and unapologetically proclaimed his faith.
King Agrippa shows up. Obviously a Jew. Here comes Herod walking in, and the Apostle Paul meets him in this massive cataclysmic opportunity. I just see the whole thing going down right here, Eric.
Maybe right where we're standing or thereabouts, yeah.
Could be. And so here comes Herod stepping in, and he, being Jewish, understood where Paul was coming from. And Paul says, I'm so glad that you're here, Agrippa. Let me talk to you because you know where I'm coming from. And here's what Paul did. Paul was arguing to keep Christianity connected to Judaism. Christianity and Judaism are together, they're not separate. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection after death. And so Paul was saying, Jesus died, but he rose from the dead. And the Pharisees didn't like it. And Paul says, why do you have a problem with this? This is your theology already, that there is a resurrection. And so then he goes and he looks at Agrippa and he says, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You understand. And by the way, Moses and the prophets spoke of this. And so all I'm doing is talking about the hope of our faith. And when Paul connected those, Agrippa looks around, he goes...
He put Agrippa on the spot.
He did. He pulled Agrippa into his testimony. and they couldn't say anything about it. And Paul stands there. Of course, he does get to go to Rome later on because that's what he had appealed to, but they didn't have any charges they could lay to him. Here's what I love, Eric. I love that when Paul was put on the spot and he knew that there was men standing around that could actually take his life, they had the authority, he stood his ground. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and I'm going to declare the truth in love, but I'm going to declare the truth. And he did that day in front of Agrippa, in front of the governors, in front of all the upper echelon in that time, and he shared the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we saw Gentiles begin to accept Christ in this area right here.
Herod lasts a few decades, 4 decades, and very, very quickly everything deteriorates. His sons don't do as well as he did. The Romans declare Judea a provincia, a province. They put governors, the most infamous, of course, Pontius Pilate, whose name appears on a piece of stone that's actually the replicas here, the originals in the
Right
museum.
here, in the city, in Caesarea.
Right over
Wow.
here, right over here. But frankly, a bunch of third-rate characters, and that's the beginning of the end. So the Herod's sort of the peak of its day,
Yeah.
and a very, very rapid decline. The year 70, of course, is the destruction of Jerusalem.
Coming up, more on the history and amazing biblical heritage of Caesarea. It's The Watchman, it's Kufi, only right here on TBN. Don't move.